When I asked my mum was Ingrid Bergman, a wonderful actress. Thank you. When I asked my mum, what made you decide to be an actress? She said, I didn't choose acting. Acting chose me. It's a calling.
An 11-year-old girl sits in a house on North Rossmore Avenue and waits for her mother to come home. The house is quiet. The phone rings and rings. Outside, newsboys are shouting headlines in the street. The headlines are about her mother. She can hear them through the window. She is 11 years old, and she does not fully understand what is happening, but she understands that something is ending. She picks up a photograph on the side table. It is a photograph of the most famous actress in the world. She sets it back down. The question no one is asking, the question that matters more than any of the headlines outside, is this: who is going to take care of this child? Ingrid Bergman won 3 Academy Awards. She made Casablanca, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Spellbound, and Notorious. She was considered by many critics and many audiences to be the finest screen actress of her generation. Her face was on every magazine, every marquee, every poster, in every city in the Western world. She said, more than once, that the thing she wanted most in her life was to be a good mother. She said it in interviews. She said it privately. She believed it when she said it. But Ingrid Bergman had 4 children, and every single one of them paid a price for the life she chose. This is not Ingrid Bergman's story. That story has been told 1,000 times. This is the story of 4 people who grew up in her shadow and had to find a way to live there. A daughter left behind at 11, raised by a father who never forgave the woman who left. A son born into a marriage that was already burning at its edges, who grew up quietly in the rubble of 2 enormous reputations. Twin daughters who entered the world as the scandal was just beginning to settle, who spent their entire childhoods being half of something, and who then went in 2 completely opposite directions. What those 4 people went through, and who they became, and what they carried for the rest of their lives, is what we are going to cover today.
What you're about to watch has been buried for centuries. Lost, forgotten, hidden in plain sight. Most people walk past these walls every day and feel nothing. But you clicked. Which means somewhere deep inside you, you already knew there was more to the story. And there is. Every crack, every stone, every shadow on these ancient walls whispers a secret the history books never told you. Welcome to Ancient Walls, where the past doesn't just speak, it screams. Now, sit back. Turn up your volume, because what comes next will change the way you see the world forever.
Chapter 1. The Life That Couldn't Hold. Ingrid Bergman was born on August 29, 1915, in Stockholm, Sweden. Her mother died when she was 2 years old. Her father died when she was 12. She was raised after that by an aunt who also died within a year. By the time she was 13, she had outlived almost everyone who was supposed to protect her. She entered the Royal Dramatic Theatre School in Stockholm, and she never looked back. By her mid-20s, she was in Hollywood, under contract to David O. Selznick, and within a few years she was one of the most recognizable human beings on the planet. Her daily life in the 1940s looked like this: early mornings on set, long hours under lights. A husband in the background, a Swedish dentist named Petter Lindström, handling her contracts, managing her affairs, keeping the household running, a daughter at home with nurses and housekeepers. Ingrid working, always working, the work consuming everything. She was generous on set and demanding of herself. She ran lines until the other actors begged to stop. She was not a woman who did anything halfway, and that quality, that absolute inability to hold back, was exactly what made her great and exactly what made the years that followed inevitable. In 1948, Ingrid Bergman watched a film called Rome Open City. It was directed by an Italian filmmaker named Roberto Rossellini. She watched it and she could not stop thinking about it. She wrote him a letter. She said she would love to work with him. She said she spoke English, a little French, and very little Italian, but she believed they could make a great film together. Rossellini wrote back immediately, and then everything that came next happened very fast. She went to Italy in the spring of 1949 to make Stromboli. She was 33 years old. Petter Lindström stayed in California. Pia stayed in California. And somewhere on the volcanic island of Stromboli, Ingrid Bergman fell completely in love with Roberto Rossellini, and the life she had built in America began to come apart at the seams. By the fall of 1949, she was pregnant. She was still legally married to Petter Lindström. The news broke in early 1950. A United States senator stood on the floor of the Senate and called her an instrument of evil. Her films were pulled from theaters. Letters poured into studio offices and church offices and newspaper offices from people who had loved her and now felt betrayed. And back in California, Petter Lindström filed for divorce and fought for full custody of the only child she had left behind. Before we continue, I want to pause for just a moment. If you've made it this far into this story, it's probably because something in her life touched something in yours. Maybe it's the way she kept going when everything fell apart. Maybe it's the way she loved people who didn't love her back. Maybe it's the way she built something beautiful out of something broken. These women, the ones we cover on this channel, they didn't just live interesting lives. They left something behind, a blueprint. Not written in any book, but written in every choice they made, every comeback they engineered, every scar they turned into a crown. And I started asking myself, what are you leaving behind? That question is exactly why I created She Endured a Legacy Journal, designed specifically for women like you. Women who watch these stories not just for entertainment, but because something in you recognizes something in them. Inside, there are 7 chapters of guided reflection prompts that will walk you through your origin, your roles, your tragedies, your comebacks, and the legacy you are actively building right now, whether you realize it or not. This is not a diary. This is not a planner. This is a mirror. It asks you the questions nobody else is brave enough to ask you, and it gives you the space to answer them honestly, maybe for the first time. It's available right now on Gumroad. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. It's a digital download, so you have it within seconds of purchasing. If her story moved you, I promise yours is worth writing down too. Now, let's get back to hers. Chapter 2. The daughter left behind, Pia, who was 11 years old when her mother left, and did not see her again for a very long time. Friedel Pia Lindström was born on September 20th, 1938, in Stockholm, Sweden. She was known from childhood simply as Pia. Her father was Petter Aron Lindström, a neurosurgeon of considerable intelligence and even more considerable stubbornness, a man who had once been a dentist and retrained himself into a brain surgeon through sheer force of will. He adored his daughter. He was not a warm man by the accounts of most people who knew him. He was precise, controlled, and completely devoted to Pia in a way that had very little room for softness. When Ingrid left, Petter did not grieve quietly. He fought. What made Pia different from the other 3 was this. She was old enough to understand what was happening. She was 11 going on 12 when the news broke. She could read the newspapers. She could hear the radio. She knew her mother's name because her mother's name was everywhere. The other 3 children were born into the scandal. Pia lived through the moment it arrived. Her early life after 1949 was shaped by 2 things: her father's iron certainty that Ingrid had done something unforgivable, and the complete absence of the woman whose face was still on every movie screen in the country. Petter Lindström won full custody of Pia in the divorce proceedings of 1950. Ingrid's visitation rights were limited and tightly controlled. She was living in Italy with Rossellini, raising a new family. working with her new husband on a series of films that the American press mostly dismissed as failures. And Pia was in California, going to school, growing up, with a father who worked long hours and a mother who was an ocean away. Here is the thing about growing up that way. You do not feel the absence as one large event. You feel it in small moments, repeated over years. A school play with no mother in the audience. A birthday with a card postmarked Rome. A Sunday afternoon when all the other girls talk about their mothers and you change the subject. Pia has spoken about this, carefully, in interviews given many decades later. She does not use dramatic language. She says it simply. She says she grew up without her mother. That is the sentence she uses. 7 words, and she stops. The hardest moment did not come at 11. It came over the years that followed, slowly and then, all at once. The world watched Ingrid build a second life in Rome. The world watched the Rossellini children born, photographed, celebrated, written about. And Pia was in California. She was 12, she was 13, she was 14. She was not in the photographs. She did not see her mother for years. The exact number of years depends on which account you read, because Pia has never given the full, precise timeline publicly, and because the legal arrangements shifted over time. What is documented is this. Meaningful, sustained contact between mother and daughter did not resume until the late 1950s. After Ingrid's marriage to Rossellini had begun to collapse, and after the tide of public opinion in America had slowly, reluctantly, begun to turn. By the time they found each other again, Pia was nearly a young woman. The years between 11 and 17 are not small years. They are the years when a person decides who they are. Pia decided who she was without her mother in the room. She went to university. She studied. She became, in time, a journalist and a television reporter, working in New York City for WNBC, covering film and the arts with a precision and intelligence that people in the industry respected. She married, and then she was divorced, and she built a life in Manhattan that was professional and private in equal measure. She did not trade on her mother's name. She did not write a tell-all book. She did not give the kind of interview that tears the curtain back and shows you everything. She and Ingrid did reconcile. The relationship was complicated in the way that any relationship is complicated, when it carries that much history and that many years of silence. But they found their way to each other. When Ingrid Bergman died on August 29, 1982, her 67th birthday, of breast cancer, Pia was there. The daughter who had been left behind was in the room at the end. Pia's story is about what survives a desertion when the person deserted refuses to let it be the only thing that defines them. Chapter 3. The Son in the Noise, Renzo. The son who grew up in the noise, Roberto Rossellini Jr., the child who carried the weight of 2 enormous names. Renato Roberto Giusto Giuseppe Rossellini was born on February 2, 1950, in Rome, Italy. He was the first child of Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini. He came into the world while his parents were still technically not yet married, while the divorce proceedings between Ingrid and Petter Lindstrom were still working their way through the courts, while American senators were still making speeches about his mother on the floor of the United States Congress. He did not ask for any of that. He was simply born. But the world he was born into was on fire. He was known as Roberto Jr., or, more casually, as Renzo. What made him different from the others was the specific weight of his name. His father was Roberto Rossellini, one of the founders of Italian neorealist cinema, a man of extraordinary talent and equally extraordinary volatility, a man who moved through life on instinct and left wreckage in his wake, with very little apparent awareness that he was doing so. His mother was the most famous actress in the Western world, Roberto Jr., carried both of those names and both of those legacies before he could walk. His early life was shaped by the texture of the Rossellini household, which was not a quiet one. His father worked constantly, obsessively, on films that ranged from brilliant to baffling. His mother was working too, making Italian films with his father, films that the press often dismissed or ignored, far from the glamour of Hollywood. The family lived in Rome, and there was always something happening, always someone arriving or leaving, always a project, always an argument, always another film being planned on a kitchen table at midnight. It was a household of very large personalities and very little stillness. And then when Roberto Jr. was 7 years old, his parents' marriage ended. The divorce of Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini was finalized in 1957. By that point, his father had become romantically involved with Sonali Das Gupta, an Indian screenwriter he had met while filming a documentary in India. The irony was not lost on anyone paying attention. The man whose affair with Ingrid Bergman had caused one of the great public scandals of the post-war era had now left Ingrid for another woman in circumstances that carried the same particular charge. Roberto Sr. was not, in the end, a man who could stay. He was a man who moved toward whatever was new and bright, and then moved again when it stopped being new. Roberto Jr. was 7 years old when his father left. He had a mother who was now a single parent, an absent father who was making international headlines again, and two younger sisters, both born in 1952, who needed attention and care. The household that had always been loud became loud in a different way. What Renzo did with all of that is quiet and specific. He moved toward music, not performing, not film, not the kind of work that puts your face in front of an audience. He moved toward the construction of music, the production of it, the architecture of sound that most people never think about when they listen to a song. He became a music producer. He worked across genres, across languages, with artists on different continents. He built a career that was genuinely his, not a reflection of his parents' careers, but something he had made with his own hands. He did not give many interviews about his childhood. He did not write about it. He did not appear on talk shows to explain what it had been like to be the son of those two people in those years. He simply worked. He built his life in the space between the spotlights, which for a child of Roberto Rossellini and Ingrid Bergman is actually the hardest space to find. He maintained a relationship with both his parents as they aged. When his mother died in 1982, he was 32 years old. When his father died in 1977, he was 27. He had outlived both of the enormous presences that had shaped his beginning, and he kept going. Renzo's story is one of a man who chose the quiet work over the loud name, and who built something real in that choice. Chapter 4. The twin who stepped into the light, Isabella. Now the twins, born on the same day, into the same house, raised in the same chaos, and yet, from the very beginning, two completely different people. Isabella Fiorella Elettra Giovanna Rossellini was born on June 18, 1952, in Rome, Italy. Her twin sister, Isotta Rossellini, was born minutes before her on the same day in the same room. Their parents had been married for 2 years. Their older brother, Roberto Jr., was 2 years old, and the scandal that had announced their family to the world was just beginning to cool into something that would follow all of them for the rest of their lives. What made Isabella different from Isotta was visible almost from the start. Isotta moved toward language and learning and the interior life of books and ideas. Isabella moved toward surfaces, toward appearance, toward the specific conversation between a face and a camera that some people are simply born knowing how to have. Their early life was shaped first by the marriage and then by the divorce. They were 5 years old when their parents' marriage ended. They were 5 years old, which means they did not lose a father to death or distance in the dramatic sense. They lost him to another life, to another country, to a new family he was building in India. Roberto Rossellini Sr. did not disappear from his children's lives entirely. He came and went. But coming and going is its own kind of absence, especially when you are 5, and then 6, and then 7, and the man who is supposed to be there keeps being somewhere else. Their mother managed. Ingrid Bergman, in the years following her divorce from Rossellini, was a woman rebuilding. She married Lars Schmidt, a Swedish theater producer, in 1958. She was working again, returning to the stage and to film in ways that the world was slowly, grudgingly allowing. She had won a second Academy Award in 1957 for Anastasia, which was considered by many to be a kind of Hollywood forgiveness, a reaching back toward the woman they had thrown away. She was building her reputation back, brick by brick. And she was raising 4 children, 1 in California with Petter, and 3 in a household that moved between Rome and Paris and London depending on where the work was. Isabella and Isotta grew up in that moving household. 3 cities, 3 languages, 3 sets of friends who had to be left behind every time the family relocated. It was a cosmopolitan life, and an unsettled one in equal measure. They were the daughters of one of cinema's great directors and one of cinema's great actresses, which meant they grew up around extraordinary people having extraordinary conversations, which also meant they never had quite the experience of being ordinary. Isabella fell once from a tree when she was 11 years old. She landed badly. The impact damaged her spine. For a period that lasted more than 2 years, she wore a full-body cast and was largely confined. She had surgeries. She was in pain. She was a child in a body cast, watching her twin sister move through the world without her. Here is what is remarkable about that period, in retrospect. Isabella Rossellini, who would go on to become one of the most photographed faces of the 20th century, spent 2 years of her adolescence locked in plaster. She has spoken about it as a defining time. Not because it broke her, but because it forced her to develop an interior life that had nothing to do with how she looked. She did not go straight into modeling. She worked for a time as a television journalist in Italy. She translated for RAI, the Italian public broadcasting service. She was in her 20s, working behind a camera rather than in front of one, when the fashion world found her. Lancôme signed her as a spokesmodel in 1982. She was 29 years old, which by the standards of the modeling industry was practically ancient. Most models had retired by 29. Isabella was just beginning. She held that contract for 14 years. 14 years is an extraordinary run for any modeling contract. In that time, she became one of the most recognizable faces in advertising in the Western world. Her mother had been on every movie poster. Isabella was on every magazine page. And then film found her too. In 1986, a director named David Lynch cast her in a film called Blue Velvet. The role was Dorothy Valens. It was not a gentle part. It was dark and disturbing and required her to be completely exposed, physically and emotionally, in ways that most actors avoid if they can. Isabella did not avoid it. She went directly into it. The performance was unlike anything in her mother's filmography. It was something she had built entirely herself. She married twice. Her first marriage was to Martin Scorsese, the American director, in 1979. They divorced in 1983. Her second marriage was to Jonathan Wiedemann, a Danish makeup artist with whom she had her daughter, Elettra Wiedemann, born in 1983. She and Wiedemann divorced as well. She went on to have a long partnership with the filmmaker Gary Oldman. She later adopted a son. In her later years, she turned to writing, and to a specific and unusual kind of short film work she called green porno, in which she portrayed invertebrate animals in their mating behaviors. It was funny and strange and scientifically serious, and exactly the kind of thing no one could have predicted from the woman who had been the face of a French perfume house for 14 years. It was also entirely consistent with who she was, a woman who was born with an extraordinary face and spent her whole life refusing to let that be the only thing about her. She became interested in animal behavior in an academic, not casual way. She studied it, she lectured on it, she enrolled at Hunter College in New York, and completed a graduate degree in animal behavior and conservation when she was in her 60s. At an age when many people are winding down, Isabella Rossellini was writing thesis papers and sitting in classrooms with students 40 years younger than her. Isabella's story is about a woman who was handed the most beautiful surface imaginable and spent her entire life building something serious underneath it. Chapter 5. The twin who chose obscurity, Isotta. Now, the other twin. The one the world knows least about, and who may have built the most interesting life of the four. Isotta Rossellini, born June 18th, 1952, in Rome, Italy, in the same minute that delivered her famous sister into the world. She was the firstborn twin. She was not the one the cameras followed. She was the one who went to the library. What made Isotta different from the others was a specific kind of interior gravity. She was a person drawn to ideas rather than to presence. In a family of extraordinarily visible people, she became interested in the kind of work that happens in seminar rooms and on the pages of academic journals, work that is rigorous and exacting and completely indifferent to fame. Her early life was shaped by the same forces that shaped Isabella's. The divorce, the itinerant household, the 3 languages, the famous parents going in opposite directions. But where Isabella eventually moved toward the camera, Isotta moved away from it. She pursued Italian literature in a serious academic way. She went to university. She did the slow, patient work of becoming an expert. She earned her doctorate. She became a professor of Italian literature and eventually taught at Middlebury College in Vermont, one of the most respected liberal arts colleges in the United States, particularly known for its language programs. She taught Dante. She taught the Italian literary tradition. She taught in a classroom in Vermont, far from Rome, far from the industry her parents had inhabited, far from the flashbulbs and the scandal and the enormous noise that had surrounded her entire childhood. There is something worth noting about that choice. Dante's Divine Comedy, the text she spent a significant part of her career teaching, is a poem about a journey through the underworld. It is a poem about what it costs to descend into darkness and what it requires to come back out. Whether Isotta ever thought of it that way is not known. But the choice of subject is not nothing. She has not been a public figure in any conventional sense. She has not written a memoir. She has not traded on her parents' names. She has not appeared in documentaries about her mother or her father in the way that some celebrity children eventually do when the silence becomes its own kind of burden. She has simply done her work. She has taught her students. She has written her academic papers. She has lived in Vermont, which is about as far from Rome and Hollywood as it is possible to get while still being on the same planet. She did act, at certain points. She appeared in a small number of films and television productions, but it was always peripheral to her main identity, which was the work of scholarship. She did not want to be known as Ingrid Bergman's daughter who became an actress. She wanted to be known as a professor of Italian literature who happened to have an unusual family history. In her later years, she has remained committed to that distinction. She is not famous, she is accomplished. These are not the same thing, and she has always seemed to understand that. Isotta's story is about the specific freedom that comes from choosing obscurity on purpose. Chapter 6. What they made of it. Now pull all 4 of them together. Look at what they share. Being connected to Ingrid Bergman meant growing up in the immediate proximity of one of the most discussed, most analyzed, most publicly judged lives of the 20th century. Not a comfortable proximity. Not a manageable one. Ingrid Bergman was not famous in the quiet way that some people are famous. She was famous in the explosive way, the way that makes headlines and ruins careers and gets senators to their feet on the floor of Congress. Her children did not inherit a name. They inherited a controversy, and every single one of them had to decide what to do with that. For Pia, the answer was journalism. Careful, specific, professional journalism, done under her own name, in a city that was not Hollywood. with a precision that owed more to her father's neurosurgical training than to her mother's intuitive genius for performance. For Renzo, the answer was production. Music built in studios, by hands that stayed behind the glass, in a career that never once required him to stand in front of a crowd and be recognized. For Isotta, the answer was Dante and Vermont, and a classroom full of students who probably had no idea what her mother's name meant to the generation that had grown up watching Casablanca. For Isabella, the answer was something harder to name, because she did the opposite of her siblings. She walked directly into the light. She let the cameras have her face. And then she used everything that happened to her in that light to build something that was completely, unmistakably, entirely hers. What they all share is this. Not one of them tried to be Ingrid Bergman. Not one of them tried to carry the flame or preserve the legend or position themselves as the official inheritors of the story. They each took what they were given, which was extraordinary and painful and complicated in equal measure, and they made something else out of it, something smaller, something more livable. Here is the small, specific detail that captures all of it. In 1982, the year Ingrid Bergman died, Isabella Rossellini had just signed the Lancôme contract. Isotta Rossellini was beginning her academic career. Renzo was working in music production. And Pia Lindström was covering film and the arts on television in New York City, doing her job with the same precise professionalism she had brought to everything since the age of 11 when she had learned, the hard way, that the world does not stop because a child needs it to. 4 people, 4 completely different lives, and at the center of all of it, the woman who had started everything. There is a detail about Ingrid Bergman that is not in the film histories or the scandal retrospectives or the Oscar tribute reels. It is a small thing. In the last years of her life, when she was ill with the cancer that would eventually kill her, she wrote letters, long, careful, personal letters to people she had not been close to for years. She wrote to people she had wronged. She wrote to people she missed. She wrote to Pia. She was not a woman who had learned to apologize easily or naturally. The letters were not apologies exactly. They were something harder than apologies. They were attempts. They were a woman who had spent her entire life moving forward, who was now, at the very end, trying to turn around. She died on August 29, 1982, her 67th birthday. Pia was there. The daughter who had been an 11-year-old girl sitting by a window in Hollywood, listening to newsboys shout her mother's name in the street, was in the room at the end. What passed between them in those final hours is not known. It belongs to Pia, and Pia has kept it. What the viewer saw at the beginning of this story was a little girl and a question nobody was asking. Who is going to take care of this child? 33 years later, the answer turned out to be the child. The child took care of herself, and so did the others. In their different ways, in their different cities, in their different languages and their different careers and their different kinds of silence, all 4 of them figured out how to carry what they were given and keep walking. That is not a neat ending. It is not a triumphant one. It is something more like the truth, which is that the children of extraordinary people are almost never extraordinary in the same way. They are extraordinary in quieter ways, in ways that require longer attention spans and less glamorous evidence. They deserve that attention. Ingrid Bergman's story has been told in retrospectives, in biographies, in documentaries about the golden age of Hollywood, in long essays about the double standards applied to women who chose their own lives over the lives expected of them. The diamonds, the scandal, the 3 Academy Awards, the exile from Hollywood, and the return. That story is known. This one, the story of the 4 people who lived in its aftermath. The daughter who waited, the son who chose silence, the twins who went in opposite directions. That is the one worth sitting with. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.